Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. It's our series called Changes Following a Likely Russian Victory in Ukraine. This is part 17. And in this part, what we'll be discussing is the desperation of the West, as indicated by the U.S. turning to sending the cluster ammunition into Ukraine. We'll also be talking about how the East, in contrast, to the West, is putting together their version of a new world, of bringing forth, a new world, while the West seems to be declining. And we'll also be discussing what's going on with Turkey A, formerly known, as Turkey, but it seems to be the trend to speak of them as Turkey A, so I will certainly do so. First, I want to talk about the cluster munitions that are getting used So here is a piece. Hang on a second. Let me. Hang on a second while I share this piece. Hey, thanks. Okay, thank you. I'm going to start off tonight's discussion by sharing a piece from Scott Ritter, which appeared on Sputnik, which of course is a Russian outlet, Russian state media. This is Sputnik International. And here is, we are being joined by D. Piers, I believe. Hello. This K is D. Piers, who is the host of Around the World with D and Friends. And I just completed a very good stream with her, where we renamed Governor of Florida Ronald DeSmutrich.
Yes.
For very good reason, but you have to see the stream to realize why. So we will leave it as a little mystery for now.
Yes, that sounds good.
But we've given him a new nickname.
Yes, it applies to him very much so.
Okay, so here we are. We're starting off a discussion tonight from Scott Ritter. There's an article that appeared on Sputnik International that was authored by Scott, who is very famous by now, as a great analyst of the Ukraine war. There's a photo of a cluster munition, I guess. I guess that's what that is. And Scott says the Biden administration has announced it will be authorizing a new tranche of military support for Ukraine, totaling around $800 million. It will also feature Bradley and Stryker fighting vehicles, air defense missiles, and anti mine equipment, and hundreds of thousands of 155 mm artillery, dual purpose, improved conventional munition, DPICM rounds, the M864. The United States has, prior to the recent announcement, refused to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine for one simple reason. Much of the world, hang on a second, I'm going to expand the type on this so it can be more easily seen. There it is. For one simple reason, much of the world, including many America's NATO allies, views cluster munitions as representing an unacceptable risk to civilian life due to the high occurrence of, quote, DUD, that is to say, dud. Uh, the dud munitions fail to detonate, okay, on impact. Okay, so in other words, if you're using a cluster, okay, artillery shell, when you fire it, it starts to break up, saturates, okay, an area, and as it saturates the area, there are a lot of explosions. Okay, yeah, like little bombs, okay, that are going off. But some of the bombs, a reasonable percentage, are duds. They do not explode. As a result, cluster munitions continue to kill long after the battle where they were employed has ended. The victims tend to be civilians who stumble upon the duds and inadvertently set them off. And I guess there is an example of a dud. Okay, or I guess I should say, okay, a cluster munition that gives rise to these duds. While the U.S. has refused to sign the Convention on Cluster Munitions, CCM, an international treaty that prohibits all use, transfer, production, and stockpiling, okay, of cluster munitions, it has recognized the need to develop cluster munitions with a design, quote, dud, unquote, rate of less than 1% to minimize the post conflict risk to civilian populations. For this reason, the U.S. military stopped using the M864 in 2016, replacing it with an improved DPI CM artillery round. While the M864 round does not meet the 1% dud threshold set by the U.S. Department of Defense for DPI CM rounds, the Biden administration touts the fact that the M864 has a dud rate of less than 2%, which, given the urgency of the need for artillery shells by Ukraine, is deemed to be an acceptable departure from the U.S. norm. However, like virtually every other statement by the United States regarding the conflict in Ukraine. The claim that the M864 DPI CM rounds being sent to Ukraine are comprised only of batches certified as possessing a dud rate of less than 2% is a calculated lie, says Scott Ritter. The tests cited, 5 of them, conducted between 1998 and 2020, were carried out at the KOFA firing range, located within the U.S. Army's Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona, using the Terminal Ballistics Evaluation Area, which possesses a prepared and instrumented impact area optimized for data collection.
Joe, look
Yeah,
at Lisa's in the audience.
I'm sorry.
Lisa Theobald is in the audience.
Hi, Lisa. How you doing? Okay. By the way, you can come in and join us if you'd like to. You can always do so. Just go to StreamYard and find your team, and you'll be able to come in. Uh, this range employs a surface area consisting of hard-packed flattened dirt designed to maximize point detonating fuses, such as those employed on the 24 M46 and 48 M42 dual-purpose anti-materiel, anti-personnel, sub but munitions contained in each M864 round. I'm finding this description to involve a lot of tongue-twisting material. Well, here are the cluster munitions. That's a picture of them. Okay, or a picture of the individual components of a cluster shell. There's the shell surrounding it. It looks like a whole bunch of components didn't go off. They just never went off. The whole thing was a dud. U.S. record of cluster bombs rings alarm bells for Ukrainians, says the caption. However, when employed in real life situations, the quote dud unquote rate of the subcomponents, okay, will be much higher, often up to 20%. Rough terrain, mud, soft soil, trees, and bushes all conspire to prevent the components from detonating. Moreover, given that the lifespan of a 155 mm artillery shell is 20 years, and that production of the M864 round, which began in 1987, terminated in 1996, the vast majority of the M864 artillery shells being provided to Ukraine have reached or exceeded their expiration date, which means that there is an increased probability that many of these shells will not perform as designed. The U.S. government knows that most of the M864 shells being sent to Ukraine have exceeded their operational, quote, use by, unquote, date, and as such, lack the reliability one would expect in times of war. Likewise, the government knows that the dud rate is derived from laboratory-like testing conditions and not the real-world environment that exists in Ukraine. The fact is that the M864 DPI CM round being delivered to Ukraine is neither as reliable or safe as the Biden administration contends. The M864 is considered by the U.S. military to be 5 to 15 times as lethal as conventional high explosives 155 mm artillery shells. This calculation, however, is derived from comparisons made regarding massed infantry and light armor vehicles deployed in the open, a situation which may have existed in 1991 during Operation Desert Storm, where some 25,000 M864 rounds were fired against Iraq. However, the battlefield Ukraine faces today against Russia is a far cry from Iraq. The Russian defenses that Ukraine is seeking to breach are constructed on uneven terrain and integrate natural and man made overhead cover. The reality of the actual battlefield conditions will result in a significant degradation of the lethal impact of the DPI CM round, but giving it at best a threefold advantage, and in many cases making it inferior to a conventional high explosive round. In short, the M864 is not a game changer. The Ukrainian forces will achieve limited tactical advantage through its employment, and in many cases see their probability of kill factors drop. So, why is this important? The U.S. decision to provide Ukraine with the M864 DPI CM round is driven by one thing and one thing only: the fact that Ukraine is running out of 155 mm artillery shells, and the U.S. has nothing left to give Ukraine except the M864. The drawdown in Afghanistan led to the Department of Defense slashing its artillery acquisition budget in 2021, creating a deficit in production that is only now being addressed in the 2023 to 24 defense budget. Ukraine's ambitious counteroffensive is predicated on planning factors built around anticipated availability of 155 mm artillery shells. As things stand, Ukraine will exhaust its supply of 155M artillery shells prior to any of the objectives set for the counteroffensive having been met. The Biden administration has decided to provide the M864 DPICM round as an emergency stopgap measure designed to allow Ukraine to sustain its planned rate of fire until which time U.S. and European production of 155 mm artillery can be expanded to meet Ukraine's operational needs, something that isn't anticipated to occur until mid 2024 at the earliest. The caption under this photo says, supplying but cluster munitions to Ukraine will make U.S. complicit in death of civilians. That's a quote, from Moscow. But the provision, of artillery shells to go on with the article, whether conventional or DPICM, cannot alter the reality that the Ukrainian military lacks the capabilities necessary to successfully defeat the Russian defenses currently deployed deployed against them. The M864 munition cannot offset Russia's tenfold superiority in artillery fire and unchallenged supremacy in the air, where Russia fixed wing and helicopter assets operate without meaningful opposition. while breaking up Ukrainian attacks with precision fire. Okay, the decision to supply by the Biden administration to supply Ukraine with the M864 round is simply a callous continuation of a policy designed to prolong a conflict Ukraine cannot win, which causes Ukraine to lose hundreds of men killed every day. It does nothing to alter the current trajectory of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which as things currently stand, points to a decisive Russian victory, an outcome the Biden administration is loath to accept. So let's get this straight. We have a munition which the U.S. previously refused to supply to Ukraine because the munition will result in the death of civilians, probably thousands of them, over a period of time. So the U.S. has refrained from producing these munitions since 2016, and obviously thinks it's wrong to use them again in combat because of the threat to civilians. There's an international treaty that we are not a party to that says the rest of the world agrees that these should not be used, that it is immoral to use them. Neither we nor the Russians are parties to the treaties. So why are we using the munitions now? Why are we sending them to Ukraine for use? Simply because it is expedient, okay, to do so. Simply because we cannot meet the production requirements of Ukraine, okay, the collective West cannot meet the requirements of Ukraine for the artillery aspect of the war against the Russians. And so, for that reason, because we are running out of the conventional artillery that was used in the war, and because Ukrainians are using badly, out of desperation, what we are doing on behalf of the collective West and on behalf of the Ukrainians is to supply them with the kind of artillery shell that is bound to kill civilians, non-combatants, children, okay, in many, many cases. When you think about this, it is a human rights violation. It is probably a war crime. And we are doing it when we know it will not affect the course of the war. Scott Ritter is one of the leading military experts on this particular war. He, of course, is well known as the weapons inspector. He knows all about this kind, okay, of weapon. He was active in Operation Desert Storm. He knows what these munitions can do and what they do to civilians and to children. And yet we will use it anyway because we cannot bear to give up and make peace in Ukraine. We started out with an objective. that had a legitimacy that was highly questionable. That objective in foreign policy was to cause a war in this area by surrounding Russia and to use the war to weaken Russia so as to create instability in its political system, replace the president of Russia, and go on from there to exploit the natural resources of Russia and break the Russian Federation up into its components so Russia could never be a superpower again. That's what we started out to do. And in spite of all our expectations, in spite of the economic sanctions, the horrendous economic sanctions, in spite of our freezing hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian assets in violation of international law, we, the United States and the collective West, its allies, are losing in this proxy war. Rather than accept a defeat and change policy, we exacerbate the crime of fighting this proxy war. It is a crime in itself that has led to the deaths of some 300 to perhaps 350,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We insist on fighting this war to the last of the Ukrainians. And we insist on committing war crimes, even after we know we have lost. This is so reprehensible, I don't know how anyone can set out to defend these actions by the United States, and in particular, this action. We're nearing the end of the war. We insist on doing something that is dangerous to civilians when weapons experts, such as Scott Ritter, give their considered opinion that this won't result in a Western victory anyway, that Ukraine cannot win. They still will be outmanned, even with the use of these. They still will be outmanned, okay, in the artillery area by close to 10 to 1. They have no air support. They're losing all their materials as well as their men. But we insist on pushing the Ukrainians to continue to fight this war instead of settling, and also negotiating a peace. I don't see how anyone can say anything except what we're doing here. This aspect of our foreign policy is simply criminal, and that this is the result of the Biden administration. They have come to own this foreign policy. They have come to prosecute it in a very, very extreme way. And the people most responsible for it, Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, and Victoria Nuland, are responsible for this really heinous war. Okay.
Joe,
Yeah.
Lisa's looking for the link.
Ah, I will put in the link. I'm sorry, I forgot to do the links. Hey Lisa, I thought I sent you the link in the DMs, but of course I will be happy to put it in the comments as
Mhm.
well. Okay, Lisa makes a number of really great comments here. She says, I called my senators today. I'm not so savvy about this anymore. I can't find the link Joe sent me last week. I sent it to you actually today. It was uh, it was earlier today. It's in the Twitter DM. Mortality never goes out of style. Oh, actually, it should say morality never goes out of style. The administration needs to find some fortitude, okay, and morality. And she says, chutzpah. Then she says, chutzpah ain't us. Then she says, the same old song and dance. Do we have any moral fiber remaining? I have to say something about that, Lisa. Our government, a long time ago, has accepted a philosophy which they think, okay, is pragmatism. But it has nothing in common with actual pragmatism. It's simply what they deem to be short run practical. They're always doing things that they view as practical, okay, in the short run. They never look beyond. They never look to long range kinds, okay, of consequences. Theirs is a travesty of what real pragmatism is. Real pragmatism is a moral philosophy that is deep, or at least the moral aspects of that philosophy, okay, are deep, and the epistemological aspects and ontological aspects of that philosophy are also deep. And these people are bastardizing the ideas, okay, of pragmatism, so that all of the moral fiber is taken out of it. And William James and John Dewey, okay, and E.A. Singer and other great philosophers, okay, of pragmatism have plenty of moral fiber, but these people have none. So let's quickly go over some other pieces here. I won't be reading these. I'm just going to call your attention to them. This is a Common Dreams piece. There's a picture, okay, of Betty McCollum. There at the start, she's a congresswoman from the state, okay, of Minnesota, the western part, okay, of Minnesota, southwestern part, okay, of Minnesota. She's one of the few Congress people that has the courage to try to defend the rights of Palestinians from time to time. And here she is opposing Biden's move to send these horrible uh, tools of war to Ukraine. The legacy of cluster bombs is misery, death, and expensive cleanup generations after their use, said Representative Betty McCollum. Quote, these weapons should be eliminated from our stockpiles, not dumped in Ukraine, unquote. This is by Kenny Stansel on July 8th. Several high ranking House Democrats have joined human rights groups expressing dismay. Let's see who the Democrats are. Yeah, Jimmy McGovern, a Democrat of Massachusetts, ranking member of the House Rules Committee, said he continues to strongly support helping Ukraine stand up to Russia's brutal war of aggression, but cluster munitions won't help. They're indiscriminate weapons that disperse hundreds of bomblets, which can travel far beyond the military targets and injure, maim, and kill civilians, often long after a conflict is over, long after a war is over. Uh,
She can't find the link.
oh, you mean to this article?
No link to the show to come in.
Oh, I'm going to send her a link. She does not need a link though. She is um, um, uh, she's a team member, but I will invite her so she can come in. Tell her I'll invite her in the Twitter DM.
Okay, she's right here. I'm sure she can hear you.
Okay. So I'm going to put it right in our Twitter DM, Lisa. Okay. So there you are. She says, Joe, you and I converse way too much. Can't find the link to save my life. Okay. Okay. So, uh, okay. So another one who is angry about the cluster munitions is predictably Barbara Lee, ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, and the only one to vote against the Iraq War back in 2001. Uh, she pointed out that more than 3 dozen human rights and anti-war organizations had urged Biden in June to remain steadfast.
Excuse me, Joe. She doesn't know what you mean. Could you just put like it in the comments here and then take it out when she gets in here? The link?
I don't know if I can do that. It's in her DM. She should be able to very quick. Is she saying she can't get to it?
Correct. Let me see if I can get into our get it over here. Now, see, this one's hard for me too.
Okay, I will just leave it for her in there.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. She is here now.
Oh, good.
She's gotten in. Except her camera's not working. But I'll still add her to the stream. Hey, Lisa, you here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Well, I've got lousy internet in this house that we're living in. So you might have to deal with me being off camera. But hi, everybody.
It's great to see. Well, I shouldn't say see you. It's great to hear you.
It's great to be heard.
Yes.
Okay, would you like to add?
You want me to go? No, honey, I'm going out. I'm just got to move my plug in. Hold on, guys. I've got to reconfigure the house here. Hold on. It's just casualties of war. No, I'm kidding. Here's where I'm at with this. It was not palpable, in my opinion, to listen to this horse shit about how this is a humanitarian effort and la, and we didn't provoke this and we're Putin apologists. You know what? That, for whatever it's worth, I could stomach. Cluster ammunition is a war crime, plain and simple.
It's horrible.
Call it what it is and be embarrassed, be disgusted, be sickened by it because it's disgusting.
It is. People don't realize how vicious and horrible it is and why it's banned by so many countries.
It's disgusting. And the American people, the government itself, admitted that. It's really easy to point the finger and accuse Russia of using cluster ammunitions and how it's a war crime until we decide to send it over ourselves.
But by the way, from what I understand, in this war, the Russians weren't using cluster munitions.
And that doesn't surprise me one bit. Because here we are again. Does anybody get sick and goddamn tired of getting duped? Because I'll tell you what, call your senators. Call them. Call them, hit option 3 to speak to a staff member, and then they ask you if you want to speak to a staff member, hit, and I don't remember what it is, it might be number 3 again. And then unload. Tell them. Here's what I told Bob Casey. You're a Catholic. He's a Catholic. Is he not, James? James was the staff member. Is he not a Catholic? Okay. So here's what I expect. Robert Casey, my senator, better take the podium and call for an end to this war, because this is a bridge too far. Not only is it a bridge too far, but we're marching our way into World War III. And as the mother of a 15-year-old child, James, staff member of Robert Casey, my son doesn't work for the senator. They will send him. That shut him up. And I called John Fetterman. And I spoke to his staff member. And I said to them, John, who ended the gang wars in Braddock 20 years ago, that's the man I sent to the Senate. He needs to find his chutzpah and call for the end of this war, or I will work as hard to unseat him as I did to get him in office. Use your words. They matter.
Okay, so there were 11 Democratic members of Congress, okay, who opposed this and who sent a letter in protest to Biden. William R. Keating, member of Congress. Okay. Also, Raul Grijalva, member of Congress. Sarah Jacobs. And Thomas Malinowski. I'm surprised to see him. He's pretty centrist. Let me tell you that. He is a veteran, though. And maybe that's why he signed it, because he probably had experience with those munitions. Barbara Lee, Ro Khanna. Then, okay, there's Earl Blumenauer, Eleanor Holmes but Norton, Patrick Leahy. He's no longer a senator, but he signed it as a senator. And James P. McGovern and Chris Murphy. This letter might have been sent some time ago before the Congress changed hands. Yeah, it's dated December 20th, 2022. Okay, so Leahy was still a senator at that time. So, those are the ones who were sufficiently moved by the immorality of this to sign this letter to Biden. I thought that was important to call attention to.
Can
Okay,
you guys still hear me?
we can still hear you just fine. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if people are just so in denial over what this situation is or not. But what I know is that every single activist and colleague that we've worked with over the years, Dee, Joe, and everybody else who watches this show on a regular basis. If there was ever a time to find your voice and scream, it is now. It's right now. This is a red line, and we have crossed it. And not that I believe that we didn't cross the line by provoking this war to begin with, but let's just be real. If you can go to sleep at night knowing that we are sending cluster bombs to the Ukraine, then maybe you don't really believe in anything we've been trying to say. Because this makes us evil. There is no other way around it. Ukraine is not going to win because we send cluster bombs. They're not going to become members of NATO because that makes us at war with Russia. And we're not winning. Because we're fighting a proxy war, let's just use our words and be real here. We're not winning. We're losing. If you listen to what happened in NATO today, they're talking about letting parts of Ukraine into NATO. We've lost. All those NARFO, doggy, stupid bot accounts, that's exactly what they are. It's what they were. This is all garbage. You want to maim children for generations to come? Sleep well. Or find your voice and start screaming, because now is the time.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Of course, I entirely agree with you, and I suspect so does Dee
I know she does.
as well.
And you know what else
Yes.
I know? I know that everybody else who has a conscience knows we're right. Now it's a matter of separating the wheat from the chaff.
Yes. Ilhan Omar and Sarah Jacobs introduced an amendment to prohibit the U.S. transfer of this kind of artillery. Okay, the cluster shells. On Thursday, okay, this was July 7th, I guess this article was written. On the Thursday before that, they introduced an amendment to prohibit the transfer or sale, okay, of the cluster shells, as Biden granted final approval. Okay. The amendment is an amendment to the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, which passed out of the House Armed Services Committee last month. States no military assistance shall be furnished for cluster munitions. No defense export license for cluster munitions may be issued, and no cluster munitions or cluster munitions technology shall be sold or transferred. The statement, Sarah Jacobs said she opposes, she's a congresswoman from California, and is alarmed by the Biden administration's decision to send the cluster bombs to Ukraine, which has been using the cluster munitions already in its arsenal to fight off the invasion, of Russia. So Ukraine has already been using cluster munitions of their own. So it's not the Russians who have been using them. Okay, it's the Ukrainians who have been using them. I will leave a link to that article also about the amendment that's offered by the Congress people, Okay, I think Lisa stepped out a little or was thrown off, and so she's back now. Hello, Lisa, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Sorry, my internet's lousy.
That's quite all right. It's quite all right. So, I wanted to move away from this particular issue, but I want you also to understand the general point. This is a desperate move by the West, by the United States, which cannot succeed in changing the course of the war. It is so reprehensible that they're resorting to stuff like this because they cannot bear to lose. We are human beings. It is not all about winning all the time. It is about behaving with a modicum, okay, of honor. It is about being human beings that are fit but to exist. The collective West is not acting that way right now. We have to change. When we move to the other side of the equation and we look at the BRICS, for example, I'm going to share, okay, a Wikipedia piece. There's an echo. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the BRICS piece. What I want to point out is while we descend, we, the West, okay, descend into a mess, okay, of immorality, okay, and dishonor, the BRICS bloc is growing or is set to grow very, very fast now. There's a section in this Wikipedia article I'm sharing that's about potential further expansion, okay, of the BRICS. Ahead of the BRICS summit, South Africa's foreign minister, Naledi Pandor, said that there are 12 countries interested in joining the initiative. Of the 12, she mentioned 7 countries specifically, namely Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Algeria, Argentina, Mexico, and also Nigeria. On June 14, 2023, Russia's ambassador to Egypt announced that Egypt had applied to join the BRICS group. Pandor also said that membership discussions will be dealt with at the upcoming summit in spite of South Africa's membership. A British politician, Jim O'Neill, said that new members should have populations of at least 100 million in order to counter the dollar dominance of the U.S. The BRICS leaders, well, I have something here on the meeting in St. Petersburg on 2013. What I'm looking for here is a passage on what is happening right now. The BRICS group has held annual summits since 2009. There are summaries here of what happened, at each of the meetings. Countries that have applied for membership include Algeria, Argentina, Bahrain, also Bangladesh, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, uh, 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 um, um, Iran, which, by the way, just joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Saudi Arabia, and the UAR. In addition, Afghanistan, Angola, Belarus, Comoros, Cuba, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Honduras, also Kazakhstan, um, um, Mexico, also Nicaragua, Nigeria, Pakistan, Senegal, Sudan, Syria, Thailand, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe have expressed the membership, have expressed interest in membership, of BRICS. So the point is, BRICS is growing very, very fast. But just between the 5 original members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, those countries represent 3.2 billion. The BRICS economics bloc will soon have more than 50% of the population of the world behind it. So that economic bloc is growing very, very fast while the West is declining. The West is currently having a meeting, in Vilnius, if I'm not mistaken, the capital, of Lithuania. Here's an article, by Radhika Desai, an expert in geopolitics, one of the world's leading experts in geopolitics, and economics. I'm going to share that article fairly briefly. She's written a brilliant work, in geopolitics. Often has shows with with Michael Hudson, and also Ben Norton, also important figures in the geopolitics field. This one, which was written on July 11th, today, by Radhika Desai, says that Vilnius will undo Biden's strategy. With his re-election campaign about to go into full swing, his ratings sagging, and more than 2/3 of those polled thinking he is too old for another term, The last thing Joe Biden needs is a foreign policy disaster, but he is about to get one.
Mm-hmm.
He has staked his foreign policy on uniting the world's democracies, and the Vilnius conference is about to put this unity on full display. Uh, it looks like that's Lisa coming back again. Okay, so Hungary is likely to continue opposing Swedish membership in NATO. French President Emmanuel Macron has publicly opposed extending the remit of NATO to Asia to target China, and given the economic gravity of China, he undoubtedly has silent supporters. So, in other words, she's making the case that the West is coming apart, okay, at Vilnius, or will.
Yeah, you think?
She thinks, yeah. However, Biden's foreign policy disaster will involve the all consuming issue of the day, Ukraine. Here, disagreements are so profound that it is no longer clear what the question is. Is it Ukraine's immediate membership of NATO? That is not opposed just by Germany. Even President Biden, I don't know who has come in now. I guess Lisa dropped out again, okay, and is coming in. Even President Biden, after months of dangling membership before Ukraine, now says he will not, quote, he will not be able to make it easy, unquote, for Ukraine to join. He now says that the hapless country, which has squandered untold treasure and lives in war, and has lost vast territory and suffered practically irreparable damage to society and the land, will have to wait until after it has concluded a peace treaty before it can join. Does that mean the U.S. wants them to conclude a peace treaty now? I don't know. I certainly hope so. The turnaround this represents for President Biden, who has insisted that the U.S. will back Ukraine, quote, as long as it takes, unquote, to win against Russia, is bound to further set back his credibility at home, okay, and abroad. How many of NATO's 31 members, all of whom will have to agree, are willing to induct a country whose borders would likely remain in dispute even if Ukraine is dragged back to the negotiating table and concludes a peace agreement with Russia? Will the question finally boil down to little more than continuing the current levels of support for Ukraine? Even this is considerably less feasible than might appear at first glance. Billions in military aid to Ukraine have not only been controversial in the sending countries, but it has also tested supply capacities. Like, as we said before, the U.S. is running out of ammunition. They could not send conventional artillery shells to Ukraine. So they had to, I'm not going to say they had to turn, okay, to the cluster munitions. They made a choice to turn to them, and it was a highly immoral choice. But Ukraine, she says, has suffered enormous casualties. Despite this aid, Ukraine has failed to gain any significant ground. Only Russian tactical retreats in the Kharkiv or Kherson regions could be celebrated by the compliant Western media as gains. And Ukraine's failure to mount a spring offensive has produced a deafening battlefield silence. I don't think it's silent over there right now. There has been lots of warfare with Ukraine attempting to break through. not even being able to get to the first line of defense, which the Russians have set up, but being trapped in the gray zone, the zone before you get to the first line of defense, where they dug in. They can't get through the gray zone. They keep losing equipment and men in the gray zone. And they never have even hit the first of three lines of defense which the Russians have set up, okay, along the whole line of contact between themselves, okay, and the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
President Biden, she says, has sought to rally the world's countries to the enterprise, beginning with the NATO allies of the U.S. As U.S. power weakened in the new century, its economic woes, its military failures culminating in Afghanistan, and its loss of diplomatic influence, most recently manifests in the China brokered reestablishment of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between whom the U.S. has so long sought to fester hostilities. But Europe increasingly asserted its autonomy from the U.S., as it has since German Chancellor Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik. This assertion has taken the form of increasing closeness to Russia to support the region's industrial economies. Biden's chief purpose in waging his proxy war in Russia has been to so resolutely sunder the EU's relations with Russia that the EU will not have any chance but to go along with the US's aggression against China. Unfortunately for Biden, fortunately for Russia, China and the world, including Russia and likely even Ukraine, this enterprise is finally and unmistakably failing. The NATO Vilnius summit can be expected to show that the only unknowns are the form in which this failure will uh, uh, become visible to everyone, and what will happen thereafter. Will the rest of Europe follow uh, the unwillingness, okay, of President Macron to target China? One can only hope so. This piece was published in CGTN, which is an outlet, okay, of China, okay, and Radhika Desai, okay, is a professor from the University, okay, of Manitoba, okay, in Canada. She's professor of political studies there, and a brilliant analyst, I should say. Speaking of brilliant analysts, Lisa has just come back. Okay. So the East is rising, the West is very much declining. Uh, but what's going on with Turkey A? What Turkey A has been doing is it's been trying to balance off the West and the East. For a while, it's been getting the West very, very angry at it because it's been playing footsie with the Russians and the Chinese.
Because anybody with half a brain who runs a country would not isolate themselves.
Exactly. And of course, whatever we think, okay, of Erdogan, he has much more than half a brain. Much, much more than half a brain.
And his focus is on his citizens.
Yes.
Exactly.
And on the interests, okay, of Turkey A.
Yes.
And so he's been playing footsie with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and footsie with BRICS also. Okay, but recently he seems to have decided that he's been going too far. He was blocking the entry of Sweden and Finland, into NATO, which the United States, of course, and other countries have been calling for. But recently, he agreed, to not object to Finland's entry. So Finland, has now come in after Helsinki took concrete steps against the organizations that Turkey objected to, specifically the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and the Gulen Movement.
I hope you don't get yourself in trouble saying those letters. I mean, you're broadcasting on Facebook. That's what caused my controversy when I used those letters.
Oh, wow. Well, all I'm doing is reporting from an article.
I was reporting and I got slammed for over a month for it.
Yes, well, hopefully I will not. But if I do, well, that's just too bad.
Yes.
But Turkey eventually lifted its objection to Finland, so I guess I have gone through that already. However, Turkey, is continuing to block Sweden's NATO bid. But Sweden has now taken concrete steps. Sweden and Turkey work together closely to address the legitimate security concerns of Turkey. Sweden has amended its constitution, changed its laws, significantly expanded its counterterrorism cooperation against the PKK, and resumed arms exports to Turkey. All steps set out in the trilateral memorandum agreed to in 2022. So guess what? Turkey has withdrawn its objections to Sweden, and earlier on Monday, before leaving for Vilnius, what Erdogan said was that his country would support Sweden's joining of NATO if the EU revived membership talks with Ankara. An unexpected move that some media claimed, God bless you, honey, would, quote, rock the alliance's unity. So that's really very interesting. It's very interesting condition because the EU has been blocking the entrance of Turkey for years and years and years. And God bless you again. And but Turkey has always wanted, to come into the EU. But if I know Erdogan, this now is simply speculation. What he probably really has in mind is that he will become at some point both a member of BRICS and also a member of the EU, and be in a position to broker trade between the two blocs, which would not be a bad deal, especially since the Turks are collaborating with the Russians to create a new oil pipeline that will be going into Europe. So I think this is the maneuvering, of Erdogan to get into a really central and profitable position, between the two blocs. The long-awaited, decision, says the article, has won support from the leaders and officials of other countries. Hungarian Prime Minister Orban has signaled he will follow the lead, of Erdogan. So Joe Biden said, quote, I look forward to welcoming Prime Minister Kristersson and Sweden as our 32nd NATO ally. And German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock also welcomed the quote, good news, unquote, on Twitter.
Oh, yay. Let's all have a party.
Let's all have a party. Sweden's NATO membership has been a key focus at the Vilnius summit. Ahead of the alliance's meeting, several organizations in Sweden have stepped up to voice their objection to the country's joining of the alliance. The Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society told the Dagens Nyheter newspaper last week that the country would be safer, but not belonging to a military alliance. It is, quote, a historically bad prioritization. Sweden safer outside of NATO, said Kirsten Bergia, the Society's chairperson. Quote, I'm afraid that we will escalate the tense world situation by becoming part of a nuclear weapons disaster.
Can I just ask the question that is the elephant that took a shit in the living room?
Please do so.
Sweden has always prospered with the most, what do I want to say? Hands off, peaceful neutrality.
Absolutely.
What in the world would have to incentivize them to enter into this quagmire? Other than, and I'm just going to say it out loud, some sort of corruption.
Yes, there are wealthy people in Sweden. They're part, okay, of the oligarchy, okay, of the globalists. They most probably have a lot of influence on politics, okay, in Sweden.
Well,
And they have to have had, okay, a lot of sway to get Sweden to abandon its historical foreign policy of neutrality.
no, they don't have a lot of sway. What they have is an ivory tower, an impenetrable fortress, which is the oligarchy that gets to call the shots. Just like we do.
Yes, I guess so.
Nobody gets to weigh in on any of this. There's no voter pressure here. These decisions are made in vacuums.
Yes. Uh, there are people saying that, quote, ceasefire and peace talks, not NATO expansion, should be the focus of the key summit, okay, at Vilnius.
Yes.
A bigger NATO and cluster bombs won't keep us safe, quote unquote. This is from an article by Jake Johnson of Common Dreams. I will share the article, share the link to the article here, and then I will share the article as well. I read the headline already. I won't repeat it. The start of NATO's annual summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, on Tuesday has been dominated by talk of maintaining the flow of weapons to Ukraine and potentially expanding the Western military alliance to include the war-ravaged nation as its conflict with invading Russian forces drags on. But anti-war campaigners argue that approach is a recipe for a prolonged and possibly larger military conflict that ultimately could involve the use, of nuclear weapons. Lindsay German, or maybe German, I'm not sure uh, uh, how he or she pronounces it, a founding member and convener of the United Kingdom based Stop the War Coalition, wrote Monday ahead of the 2 day summit that a ceasefire and peace talks are the only means to end this bloody spiral, unquote. Warning a primary focus on weaponry and NATO expansion would signal that, quote, Western powers are preparing for an even greater war. If they're deciding to prepare for an even greater war, they're going to need 3 years to prepare for that war. Because there's no way, with the capacity we have now, that we can contest with the Russians when it comes to military capability on the continent of Europe. Nor can we contest with the Chinese when it comes to military power in China and on the Taiwan Straits. The military capacity just is not there.
Didn't we come out this week? The administration, come out this week touting the one China policy again?
Yes, and I am going to get to that yet. The alternative to serious peace negotiations, German wrote, is that the war grinds on with battles such as Bakhmut, increasingly resembling those of the First World War, that further red lines are crossed, more cruise missiles, more cluster bombs, and then what? Tactical nuclear weapons. I'm going to skip over this somewhat.
Don't skip over thermal nuclear war. Don't. Because that's what everybody's doing.
I'm not skipping over thermonuclear war. I've already talked about the escalation.
I need to say this. I need to say this out loud.
Go ahead.
It's never been worse than right now. Never.
Yeah, the risks are so great right now. I mean, it hasn't been this bad since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
There are people who were around back then that are saying that it is worse right now. So we can all go to bed and sleep soundly, or we can get ourselves into a place where we find our voices and we stop worrying about the stupid division that is so successful that we can't even find our voice to keep our children from being conscripted into World War III. If we get that far, I am sorry if I am over the top, but I am over the top.
I don't think you're over the top. I mean, I think that Jeffrey Sachs also thinks that this is the most serious crisis since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one thing that makes it even more serious is that instead of our president trying to resolve the crisis, he appears to keep on pushing, just pushing, pushing, and pushing, and making the crisis more serious.
What is the nom de plume of Gargamel that he just appointed to the Public Democracy Council or whatever it is?
Of the Public Diplomacy Council, you're talking about the appointment, of Elliot Abrams.
Gargamel, literally.
Yeah, Gargamel, yeah. He is an awful evil guy, and he doesn't belong in any kind of diplomacy.
He is the antithesis of such.
Yes, he is not a diplomat. He is a coup master. Of course, he won't be able to manage a coup in Russia. That is not happening.
He doesn't need to. All we need to do is get some sort of a false flag going and all bets are off. I mean, you've seen the articles. We've all seen the articles, haven't we? About how they're planning on blocking out the sun. What is the result of thermonuclear war? You block out the sun. Don't think it's a coincidence.
And if you block out the sun, you have a new ice age.
Oh, we're all good. We're all goners. We're all goners.
Okay, so the final piece that I want to call your attention to. Oh, there's a little more news here. Jens Stoltenberg, who was just confirmed again for another term um, uh, as the head, okay, of NATO, went on to make clear that the NATO member or not, on the prospect of Ukraine joining the alliance, he was less definitive, saying the draft text set to be released later Tuesday is all about moving Ukraine closer to NATO membership. But he went on to make clear that whether it's a NATO member or not, Ukraine will continue to receive massive shipments of weapons from the Western powers. In reply to that, okay, I have to say, where are they going to get the massive shipments of weapons from? The Western powers are out, okay, of weapons.
That's why they're gonna play footsie for 3 years, supposedly, while they starve all of Western Europe and get everybody ready, because when they're so damned miserable, then they will sign them up for conscription and at least they'll be clothed and they'll eat. And if you think I'm over the top here, study some history.
I don't think you are necessarily over the top here, but let me go on to the next article in just another moment. Quote, a bigger NATO and cluster bombs won't keep us safe, unquote. Okay, the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, DIEM 25, the campaign co-founded by former Greek finance minister Bayanis Varoufakis, tweeted Tuesday, quote, it's time for Europe to help lead a new non-aligned movement that seeks a route to lasting peace, okay, unquote. I sure hope that happens, but here's a final piece that we'll cover tonight. That final piece is about a Biden China reset. Let me get the link on that so you can have it. This one is from Energy Intelligence. And just as we started off the show with a piece from Scott Ritter, we're going to end the show with another piece from Scott Ritter. And let me share that. This piece appeared in Energy Intelligence. It's called Biden's China Reset. And I thought it was quite interesting because I didn't see anybody else who saw what he's going to talk about here actually happening. He was the only one who picked up on it. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's June 2023 visit to China resurrected some memories of 2008, when then President Obama undertook a major reset of relations between the U.S. and Russia. Blinken's trip sought to restore bilateral dialogue to facilitate a thaw in a U.S. China rivalry that was spinning dangerously out of control. Obama's Russian reset eventually collapsed under the weight of unfulfilled expectations driven by policy incompatibility between the U.S. and Russia.
Obama's?
Yeah,
I'd say
that
it was Hillary's.
okay. Between the U.S. and Russia that no amount of dialogue could ever bridge. President Joe Biden's reset with China seems more intent on avoiding war than repairing relations and defining a policy neutral stance rather than charting a new policy direction. Tony Blinken made headlines during his visit to China when he announced the U.S. would continue to embrace the quote, one China unquote policy that defined U.S. relations with Taiwan for decades, yeah, since the 1970s, since the time of Richard Nixon. Quote, we do not support Taiwan independence, Blinken said in a press conference after meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Quote, we remain opposed to any unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences. China considers self-ruling Taiwan its own territory, and while official Chinese policy is to seek the peaceful reunification of Taiwan, China's raised the prospect of responding in a military fashion should Taiwan seek independence. Blinken's visit was promised on the notion that such an outcome would be devastating. Quote, were there to be a crisis over Taiwan, Blinken said, quote again, the likelihood is that could produce an economic crisis that could affect quite literally the entire world. One of the visit's primary goals, the establishment of a crisis in the military to military communications channel, was not accomplished. And the importance of Blinken's visit wasn't necessarily defined by fulfilled expectations, but rather the simple fact that the two nations were once again engaged in a dialogue. We have no illusions about the challenges of the relationship, unquote. Said Blinken, quote again, there are many issues on which we profoundly and even vehemently disagree, unquote. However, Blinken concluded, quote again, the United States has a long history of successfully managing complicated relationships through diplomacy, unquote. Uh, but it's hard to believe in that. I want to editorialize a bit now. When you just got through appointing to the Public Diplomacy Council uh, uh,
Gargamel.
Elliot Abrams, Gargamel, yes. Gargamel, the god of war.
He looks like him.
He does. He does. But Tony Blinken's message, diplomacy, was a stark departure from a policy trajectory by the Biden administration that seemed headed towards an inevitable military conflict with China. Biden and Xi last met at the G20 summit in Bali in November 2022. At that time, Biden reaffirmed his commitment to the quote one China policy. However, U.S. actions since the Bali meeting, including an increase in military assistance to Taiwan, coupled with diplomatic interaction with the Taiwanese government, teetered dangerously close to crossing what China called, quote, the first red line, unquote, in U.S. China relations, namely the recognition or encouragement of Taiwanese independence. Blinken's blanket declaration that the U.S. would not support Taiwanese independence was essential for changing the trajectory of U.S. Chinese relations. For a while, it seemed to some the U.S. was hell bent on pushing China into a conflict. the, but the aggressive but rhetoric by a succession of senior U.S. military officers and officials suggested that U.S. was not only ready for a war with China over Taiwan, but that they believed the U.S. could prevail if one broke out. Such conclusions represent a sharp departure from what had been a trend in war games carried out by the Pentagon simulating a U.S. Chinese conflict over Taiwan. These not only resulted in a Chinese victory, but showed, as a senior U.S. Air Force officer pointed out, quote, not just that we were losing, but we were losing faster, unquote. That statement was made in 2021, in the 2021 interview referring to 2018 war games by U.S. Air Force General Clinton Behinot, who at the time served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements. This suggested that unless the U.S. fundamentally changed course and the U.S. president presented with the option of going to war with China, would in fact face the prospect of a U.S. military defeat. While the Biden administration sought to shift uh, but some of our military capabilities to the Pacific in an effort to effect the kind of course correction advocated by in Coat, I guess it is. The outbreak of a major conflict between Russia and Ukraine in 2022 compelled the U.S. and its allies to divert uh, the military and financial resources into the European theater of operations instead. So the war in Ukraine caused a shift in our military capabilities back to Europe. The next section is toward policy neutral. One of the main obstacles to jump-starting high-level military communication between the U.S. and China are the unilateral sanctions imposed on Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu by the U.S. in 2018 over a Russian arms purchase. Quote, the U.S. side knows the reason for difficulties in its military-to-military relations with China, unquote. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in the U.S. said after Blinken's visit, quote, it actually imposed unilateral sanctions on China. Such obstacles should be removed before any exchange and cooperation could take place between the two countries. During the press conference following his meeting with Xi, Tony Blinken reiterated the position articulated by the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in congressional testimony delivered on the eve of Blinken's Chinese visit, namely that at a time when trade between the U.S. and China topped $700 billion, any effort to decouple trade and investment with China would be, quote, disastrous, unquote. However, while the desire to find an off ramp to avoid war was a priority, the issue of similarly off ramping U.S. sanctions policy was not as clear cut. Quote, we are for de risking and diversifying, unquote, Blinken said, quote again, that means investing in our own capacities and in secure, resilient supply chains, pushing for level playing fields for our workers and our companies, defending against harmful trade practices, and protecting our critical technologies so that they aren't used against us. I made clear that we'll continue to take targeted actions that are necessary to protect the U.S. national security. Blinken's visit to China was very much a mixed bag. A policy reset that seemed more interested in moving U.S. to a policy neutral position as opposed to pushing U.S. China policy in a new direction. The need for such a policy neutral stance is driven by uncertainties over the endgame in Ukraine. I have to add here that I don't think there's much uncertainty about that. In the next month, I expect a Russian offensive that is going to end the war in Ukraine. And I don't think there's anything the West can do to stop it. The Russians have too many troops that are well trained and well armed and uncommitted to the war thus far. And the Ukrainians are exhausted in every way and close to incapable of defending. In the next 2 months, there is going to be a mopping up going
I
on.
think
And perhaps more importantly, uncertainty about the political future of Taiwan, where the opposition Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang KMT, could defeat the incumbent Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, in presidential elections scheduled for January 2024. I think you were about to say something, Lisa.
I think it's worth noting that they sent Janet Yellen over there. And
Yes,
I think they're trying to rehab Tony Blinken's pathetic persona to the world.
Okay. I'm not sure Tony was so pathetic in his visit to China, but what happened thereafter was that Joe Biden started sounding off about Xi Jinping being a dictator and
Yeah.
letting out all kinds of symbolic statements that ruined some of the work, okay, that Tony did.
Yeah, but I think it's important that we note that Yellen went over there.
Mhm.
While both, did something happen to Lisa? She was in the
No,
middle
I'm
of
here.
saying something. Oh, okay, good. You were in the middle of saying something.
I
So,
was just saying that Janet was sent over there, and I don't think that that's a minor presence. That's
oh
an
no, I don't
important
think it's a
presence.
minor presence either.
They don't give her any mention here, but they did send her.
Yes, they did send her, and from what I've been reading about, okay, her trip over there, uh, she has been trying to discuss the de-dollarization issues, uh, and she's been trying to talk about some kind of reasonable transition. Uh, okay, I don't know what the result of her trip, okay, is going to be over there. She she has very neoliberal views on how things should work. I don't think those views are going to impress the Chinese. Okay, I do think that they are being polite to her. Okay, and I do think she does represent a further attempt to reset our policy with China so it is at least, okay, a neutral policy.
Hey, when you send the money lady over, I think it had more to do with her going than it had anything to do with him.
Could well be. While both Taiwanese parties oppose a unification with China, the KMT seeks friendlier ties and accuses the DPP, and by extension the US, of worsening tensions. And I think also justifiably so. That China accusation is hardly justified. If the Biden administration continued down a policy course tied to the more aggressive posture of the DPP, it would run the risk of being out of sync with the KMT but should it win at the polls. As such, a policy neutral stance on China is Biden's best option on Taiwan going into his own bid for re election in November 2024. While avoiding a war with China, the U.S. is ill prepared to win. Okay, so to summarize this, okay, I think this article is a very insightful article and looks at the real power relations, okay, between the two sides. okay, and the need for the U.S. to at least have, okay, a policy neutral stance. Uh, I think what he's highlighting here is that not only are we in a huge problem in Europe caused by the outcome, okay, of the Ukraine war, okay, as okay, it's coming out, and the strain on our military capability that we have sustained, okay, from that. But it's also clear from his analysis that we have no resources left to shift over to Asia. So we are militarily weak in both of the theaters, okay, at this point. The only military advantage we clearly have, okay, is in the area, okay, of nuclear submarines and the armaments, okay, that come out of those. But their capability, uh, uh, from the standpoint of doing something on the offensive in both of these theaters, okay, is very, very dangerous because if we unleashed anything like that, it would um, 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 start a nuclear war that we could not possibly finish because the Russians have more warheads than we have. The Chinese have some warheads too, and the Russians have hypersonic missiles that we do not have, and we don't have a defense against. So, okay, at this point, however hostile we would like to be to Russia, okay, and to China, and to the new powers rising, okay, in a multipolar world, we do not have the military capability but to enforce, okay, our will anymore. Nor do we have the financial capability to do that. Okay, we are now one power, okay, among, okay, a number that holds sway, okay, in the international system. And in my mind, we have to find a way to accept that status and to work in a constructive way, given that status and that kind, okay, of military capability. And I guess for this show, I am going to leave it there and turn to the comments. Okay, I'll let Lisa in again. Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, sorry guys.
That's all right. Do you have any more comments? I am just about done with what I have to say.
I would just implore everyone to take a listen to what our FKJ has to say.
Okay, and D, have you any more comments?
Um, well, that's it. People have to pay attention and really have to stay away from Western media. And like Lisa said, pay attention to RFK Jr. Pay attention to someone who has knowledge. You know, in a lot of issues, you have to do your own investigating.
Yes, you have to do your own investigating, and the investigation has to be in the alternative media, okay, because the alternative media is the only group of people in the United States, at least, who are trying to tell the truth. And you have to look, okay, at foreign media too. Okay, I know that we have an attitude towards the Russian state media, that it's all propaganda. But I think you'll find that if you look at what they have to say, okay, and if you look at what China media has to say, and we covered a couple of articles tonight from China media, uh, and one from Russian state media by Scott Ritter, okay, as well.
And if you don't like that, you can listen to the Duran that are coming out of Cyprus and London, and they do daily updates on what's going on.
Right, and their updates are very, very good. But the point here really is you have to look at the alternative media to what you've been looking at and then make your own judgments about who is trying to tell you the truth, who has a better purchase on what the reality really is out there. And I think you look at it from that point of view, you'll see that the conventional media, okay, in the collective West, are trying to construct, okay, a narrative which departs from reality considerably. And you'll be able
Well,
to find that out when you compare the narratives, okay, of the collective West to the reporting that is coming out of the alternative sources that we've been talking about here. Sorry, D. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what people don't realize that the media in the West, for example, in the USA, is state media. People think that there's freedom, but they're just reciting. When you look at news conferences, and we don't have that independent source of debating with the news, like say the old timer news. We have just right now, it's just all state propaganda news.
Yes. So Ghost Art makes an interesting comment here. How about some 1/100th year good news? The U.S. doesn't have the productive capacity to supply the nuclear subs to Australia. So that probably is good news. Okay, because it will mean that one of our allies won't have the capability by itself to start a war with China.
Isn't that the agreement they just entered into earlier in the year with Australia?
Probably, yes.
Yeah, there was this big hubbub about that, and now they can't deliver.
Yes.
Surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the productive capacity because over the years we have offshored too much. Okay. And over the years we have been feeding huge quantities of money to the military, okay, industrial complex here for them to do projects that don't really make our defense any stronger. We actually have found that out. Okay, in other words, in the Ukraine war, when we supplied, okay, to the Ukrainians, okay, our wonder weapons, so called, these wonder weapons were easily countered by the Russians and failed to give the Ukrainians any kind of lasting advantage. I mean, our best weapons in Ukraine have failed, okay, to make a difference. And that speaks to the lack of success of our military, okay, industrial complex, in spite of the huge amounts of money that we have allocated to them. I think what most people don't realize, we have a defense budget, okay, and people do realize how large our defense budget is. If you take into account various aspects of the defense budget, including Homeland Security, we're spending more than $1 trillion a year on that. But I don't know how many people know the total defense budget, okay, of Russia that they've been countering us with, okay, in Ukraine, that they've been countering the collective West with, is the equivalent of $50 billion. We are spending 20 times more than they, and they've been able to counter our best weapons that we have shipped over to Ukraine. that speaks to a gigantic failure of our defense industry and our military industrial complex. Okay, I guess I'm talked out for the evening. How about you?
It was
Okay,
really
Lisa,
good, Joe.
thanks for joining.
You hit all the really, really pertinent information of today. It was very, very good.
Oh, thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Dee.
And thank you, Dee, for coming. Okay, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Okay, I'll be here with a Dump the Corruption show. We're starting to examine some of the key players in Congress in detail, not simply their financial details, but also their platforms, their behavior, uh, trying to get much more in depth relating the financial realities to what it is that people are doing. And so we'll be devoting the individual programs to key people in Congress. And that's the way we'll be going on from here in the Dump the Corruption shows.
Okay.
So thank you very much for tonight. And as I said, I'll see you tomorrow. And I'm sure Dee will have a very good show laid out for tomorrow as well.
Yes. And please hit the like button, subscribe, and share. And what else, Joe? Buy us a coffee?
Yeah, please buy us a coffee, folks. We're really working hard here for you. And visit my Patreon account every once in a while, too. Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Great night, everybody. And thank you again, Lisa. And good night.
Good night.